Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my channel and the first video on it. Now, I'd like to say I'm not a professional artist or anything. I'm just doing this because I want to. Honestly, the wife asked me about a year ago to start painting because I used to do a bunch of comic art and a bunch of other things, which you might see on this channel. I'm not sure yet. But in this particular case, we're going to be painting a night sky, kind of more of like almost an ethereal style painting. I got the idea to do a bunch of these little mini, I believe they're 5x7 panels a while back, because there's supposed to be 12 of them that I do. I've already done about 5 of them, which obviously I didn't record those, unfortunately, before I started making videos. But in this case, we're going to be painting an apple tree. Now, the idea behind it is that somehow these trees got ripped up from the ground and they're just kind of floating there. And yeah, that's what I'm working on now. Now, one thing in this particular video you have to be careful about if you're trying to actually do this night style painting is especially if you're using the kind of paints I use, which are not expensive. I just go to the big box store, the one that starts with a W. You get a bunch of their little 50-cent paint bottles, and the most expensive thing I use is probably the paintbrushes and the canvases themselves. Part of that is just to kind of show that you don't need expensive equipment to make decent looking paintings. So yeah, so one of the things you saw here is there was a particular brushing technique I was doing, and I know this is kind of not in line with the video at the moment that you're seeing, but instead of flipping the brush back and forth, I was doing more of a slow left to right brushing strokes, so that way it didn't actually scrape the paint. When it comes to doing the actual starry, the spackling, or the little polka dot spackling of white, there's a particular way you have to do it with your white paints. You don't want it to just be pure white, because then you'll just have, or just pure white paint on its own. It'll have little streamers and strings stuck together, and the paint will kind of glob up. But if you add a little bit of water to it, just a little bit, it'll kind of do what you see on screen. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking black with the flat brush, one of my small ones, and I'm just painting in, well, basically what looks like to be dirt, kind of just hanging there. And I'm going to attach it with, it's all going to get attached with roots. It's all silhouetted. You're not going to see much detail in that part because it's a dark piece, and you'll see highlights later, but generally speaking, at this point, I'm just doing the dirt hanging in space. That'll be all attached with roots. I'm starting to attach the roots now. It's just little streaks. You don't need to go heavy with the brush. If you have a palette knife, you can use that too. But these little lines are meant to be very thin and stringy and just flow down, connect all the little clumpy pieces of soil and ground that are hanging there. And I apologize beforehand. You may all hear my kids in the background and maybe the wife. I don't have a studio for this. It's just out in a little back room of my house. So if you hear them, I apologize during recordings, but I got 3 little kiddos, 2 of them are toddlers, and may or may not see them in the future, but we'll see. And here I am about to put on all the highlights, or at least start the highlights. It's going to be a dark brown color. It's just gray just doesn't look right on something like this. The painting itself already doesn't have that much color to it, because it's going to be mostly blue, white, black, and whatever color the leaves are going to be. But in this case, if you want to add more contrast, I would probably do a brown highlight for the ground instead of or for all like the soil instead of like gray, because gray just kind of makes it all blend in together. It makes it look cold, and that's not really the idea behind it. But you'll see a little bit while later I'll start doing more highlights. This is right just now the base layer of highlights, and I'll go to like the brighter ones in a little bit. Right about here, let's start doing the higher highlights. I mean, I don't really need to do much because it's just smaller areas, and I already had a little bit of the brighter brown in there. So I'll just take it off the paint that I already had. At this point I realized I needed to add a little bit more black to it because I added too much of the darker brown, and it kind of took away from the black shadow of the actual landmass. So that's just what I'm doing here. Alright, so when you're actually painting these trees, you don't need to do any special coloring with it, just black. Straight black works for this. It's the tree's all in shadow anyway. If you're understanding how light works, if there's light coming from the bottom, which is kind of the idea behind it, you're not going to get like the tree trunk and the branches in light unless you're being really, really specific with your painting, which in this case I'm not. It's going to be more like the leaves are lit up, but it's not really done in a way that kind of follows physics. It's more, like I said, more ethereal. Like the leaves will be nice and bright and everything else is dark. But I mean, you can use whatever technique you want here to draw the tree, just kind of make it random. My flat brush was being temperamental, which I probably need to get a new one now. So I was using just my normal like little detail brush to do this, which is fine. Just when you're pulling out the leaf or the branches, kind of try to pull away from the tree so that way you get those sharp points instead of the other way, which you see me do multiple times with this. But in the end, it won't really matter that much because I'm going to paint over most of those branches with the actual leaf. Well, yeah, here I go. Just about ready to do a kind of base coat black and green. I'm doing a real dark, or darker green than the normal standard green that came in the tube. That's going to be my first layer. And what I'm going to take is a kind of a very loose brush. You know, those kind of not really good ones you get for like kids. They're good for this. That's pretty much the only thing I use them for is when I'm doing leaves. So what I'm doing now is I'm just dabbing on color, right? I'm just following the branches. Obviously, over the course of time, sorry, a notification there. I'm going to add more colors, which you'll see later on. So just continuing to dab and kind of spread out the green a little bit more. Try not to completely cover the black, just the general area of the branches. Yeah, don't mind me here. I wasn't thinking. I thought I needed to put yellow down, which I didn't. I needed to put that green down first to do that layer and then do the yellow later on. So yeah, that's what happened. As you can see, I'm starting to put in the new highlights just from that base green color, and it's already starting to kind of look a little bit better. But the more layers you put on, the better it'll look until you get to the point where it's all kind of muddled together, and you don't want to do that. So in this case, basically simplicity in moderation usually works better for doing this sort of thing with like tree branches and leaves and flowers. Well, I apologize at this particular point. Apparently that part of the video got cut out where I actually did the yellow highlights, but it's basically the same thing as the green. I just added yellow to it and did more highlights, trying to follow the contours of those areas. So I'll have to fix doing that in the future. I mean, all this is being done on my phone at the moment, so it's not really the best setup for that. Like this whole thing really isn't the best setup, but I'm making it work. What I'm doing now is, this is an apple tree, so I am taking a Q-tip and just dipping in a little bit in red paint, and then just kind of not dabbing it on the page, just kind of letting the paint touch or flow down into the page and just at random spots. And I'm going to fix some of the contrast now, because the green kind of, or the red kind of stands out a little too much, and I need to fade it in. So later I'll end up putting a little bit more of that yellow green on there, and that should look a little bit better. At this point, I'm actually adding little highlights to the red, so it actually looks like they're a little bit more just 3D, not just green dots on a page. Now, what you may have seen me doing is like taking my finger and kind of smearing it. That's so I don't have like such a strong amount of white paint on top of the red. Just kind of like smearing it into the red so it kind of fades a little bit better. So now here is the point that you'll actually see the yellow and the green mixed, and then I'll do more highlights. And same technique as before with that loose, I guess, brown brush. I'm not sure what you call it, but the same technique. You just kind of dab it around. I spend a little bit more time doing this, so that way it kind of blends the red in a little bit, which by blending it in means like kind of technically painting over it, but it allows it to look a little bit better. And I will say at this point that in the future I will have a better setup. Got some things on order. They're going to help with that. Some better lighting, an actual proper stand for the the camera or phone, whatever I'm using. And obviously I have far bigger canvases I'm going to be using. I'm just working on what I call the panel project right now, which utilizes all these little panels to make this almost, I'm not even sure they're quite the measurements on it yet, but it's quite a bit of space, that you can take up when you line up 12 of them. What I'm doing here now is I'm adding a little bit more white to the bottom, so that way it kind of shows a little bit more maybe of a light coming from below. A little bit better like flow up. Now obviously the blues kind of didn't really fade. They didn't really blend as much as I wanted to, so that's why I'm adding more white a little bit higher up. There were kind of a little bit of hard lines, and that's just because of the brush strokes I was using. I kind of didn't do it properly, but kind of fixing it now. And here I am adding some black and then using my palette knife to kind of just jot in some little branches sticking out. Gives the tree a little bit more depth. It looks a little bit better in the end. You can still do this with a brush, obviously. I just wanted much more straight, thin lines because most of my brushes are getting a little worn, so I need to get new ones. But this is the effect. And here I lost my marker pen, so I'm using a pen to actually draw in my signature, which is my last name with the year in it. I've been using that since probably early 2000s for any of my art. Obviously I was more of a kid back then, but yeah, this painting's almost done. I mean, the next stop, and you won't get to see it, is varnish, but here you go. Well, and it is done. Well, I mean, I still have to varnish it, which I'll do that later, but thank you all for watching. I'm not exactly sure how to do an outro, but I guess I'd have to do the same thing that everybody else does, which is thank you for watching the video, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. It'll help me out. Yeah. Thank you. See you later.